Today, we're diving into an important cybersecurity regulation in 2025, and it's called NYDFS. And we're going to talk about what it means for asset inventory, IT automation, and risk governance. With me is Robert Potter, CEO of Oomnitza, to break it all down and help folks achieve compliance. So, Rob, I want to start very, very basic here. What is the NYDFS regulation and what's changing?
Yeah, great, Sarah. Thanks first for taking the time to talk through this with me. I appreciate it. The NYDFS regulations is it's one of the most comprehensive cybersecurity mandates we're seeing in the market today and impacting the markets. It continues to expand. And, the New York Department of Financial Services felt it very important to really look at cybersecurity and really put some regulation in place around what it means to be compliant. And if you look at some of the updates that are coming up, in particular this November, Section 500.14b now explicitly requires organizations to have an automated asset inventory and continuous monitoring capability. And that's a significant shift, uh, primarily because organizations today have really been challenged with understanding what their inventory looks like, what their landscape looks like, and really what their attack surface looks like. And this really gets organizations to start to think differently, really be held accountable to understand not only how are they monitoring and looking at operationally active devices in their environment, but how are they looking at the full entire life cycle of all of the assets, digital assets, hardware, software, inside of their environment that are impacting the way they operate and potentially a risk from a cybersecurity perspective.
Now, Rob, you mentioned a month. You said November. I want to specifically call out the actual date where this goes into effect, and that is November 1st of
Yeah, thank you.
2025. So
Yeah.
it's very, very fast approaching. I'd also like to have you speak to who this impacts. And I think this is really important because it's not only organizations that are headquartered in New York. So could you speak to that a little bit as well?
Yeah, I mean it's not organizations just in New York. It's organizations that are doing any type of financial interaction across any part of the New York infrastructure, right? So it's banks, it's insurance organizations, it's even in some cases auditors. And I think that really what organizations have to do is think about, is their business currently today interacting with any aspect? And it's pretty easy to look this stuff up. I think the NYDFS has done a fantastic job of understanding and communicating who this impacts and what types of organizations have to be thinking about this. But yeah, I wouldn't say it's even just limited to the United States. I think it's a global compliance regulation that organizations that meet the specific requirements of what the NYDFS is looking at, they have to be able to step up and meet each of these sections, including now the ability to collectively pull all of their digital asset inventory inside of their environment.
So just to recap, formal regulation goes into effect November 1st of 2025, and it is for financial service organizations that do business in New York, not only organizations that are headquartered. I
Yeah.
also want to expand on, I think organizations outside of financial services still need to be focused on this and care about it. And why should organizations and other industries stay abreast of what's happening here?
Well, look, I think it like any of the compliances and regulations that go on, they creep into other lines of businesses, they creep into other industries, and ultimately, organizations that have to meet one compliance typically will want the organizations they do business with to also meet those compliance. We see this a lot in the government and the government regulations and regulatory compliance that they have. We saw a lot of it in PCI. We're seeing it in HIPAA. I think this is going to continue to expand. And when you really look at it, all the years in cybersecurity that I spent, the one thing that I would come away from is you can't protect what you can't see. And I think that what we do at Oomnitza is give you that visibility, and we do it, across this entire life cycle. And so I think, it's really in good standards and in good practice, and really to drive the right outcomes for the company, that organizations are looking at what their ability is to really understand all the way from forecasting how they bring assets in, through how they procure assets, how they store them, stage them, provision them on board, and then retire them or reuse them, all the way to the end of financial depreciation. I think having that visibility is becoming more and more a sign of competency, and I applaud regulatory organizations, really dictating now that in order to be compliant, you actually have to understand what the assets are that you're bringing into your environment.
So, Rob, I think one of the things that I've noticed that is really essential for organizations to be compliant with NYDFS and many of the other regulations is automation. Can you speak a little bit to why automation is so essential?
Yeah, look, I think any organization today that's looking at how they track assets, how they handle ticketing, how they handle just the whole procurement process, and how you put systems online and use them and access them and monitoring them, the human element of that has just become so encompassing that you can't scale. And I think it's a big part of why you're seeing AI in a lot of those areas be driven as well. The ability to automate workflows, processes, improve those processes for the business. Look, it's what organizations thrive on. And if you look at that, and you look at the organizations that speak like that and the business leaders that speak like that, the critical piece of this whole thing is, how much do you trust and how accurate is the underlying data that you're doing that from? And so, having a look at all of your digital assets and the inventory of those assets, you if you don't have that and it doesn't have high fidelity in it and you can't access it with a high level of velocity, you're not going to be successful in actually protecting your environment, in building AI in your environment, and frankly, not benefiting from the cost reduction that comes from automation. And it's not about replacing people, it's about doing the 80% of redundant work that needs to be done so that your people can focus on the 20% that the human input really impacts the output, and really the outcome, and really drives the cost savings, efficiencies, and profitability of the business.
Yeah, and I want to double down on your comment around AI. I think now more than ever, we're seeing organizations struggle with AI implementations because crap in is crap out. On AI, it's now on steroids. You're getting massive amounts of bad data spit out, and it's really hard to even assess and understand the impact on the organization. So, having automation is really irrelevant if you don't have that good, clean data as a foundation and starting point. So, I think that was a really important point that you mentioned.
Yeah, yeah, I couldn't agree with you more.
Something else that I pulled out from reading the YDFS regulation is around something they mentioned called continuous monitoring and how that's an important piece of it. Can you speak to what does this actually really mean in layman terms?
So, look, continuous monitoring has been a term that's been around forever and has many different meanings. For me, it really comes back to the concept of drift. I think every organization gets themselves to a point where they feel like they have achieved goodness. They know what good looks like. They've got their environment where they want it. In the cyber world, we saw this a lot when you first deployed products out that were there to protect the endpoint or data loss prevention. But then as months go on, and users use them, and machine learning adapts, and you have new configurations and new operating systems come out, you drift away from what that good point looked like. And so as a result, what you need to do is figure out in your environment, how are you continuously checking yourself? How are you continuously monitoring what that good state is? And I think in the asset management arena, it's got a lot of similarities. We at a point understand what are the assets we're going to need when we forecast to grow our business. And then we do understand, what are we ordering? But then the first area that continuous monitoring becomes important is how do I monitor that what I ordered is actually what I received? And then how do I understand that the systems I have today are either in storage or have been staged, provisioned, and deployed? And so continuously monitoring the state of an asset, whether it's hardware or software, and continuously understanding where that asset is in the life cycle of being deployed and used in my environment, it becomes not only critical, but it has to be continuous. Because where we see the massive breaches are in areas where organizations lose sight of assets that are offline, or they lose sight of assets that are online and become orphaned, or they lose sight of assets that have come into the environment that weren't procured by the environment. And I think we're seeing more and more that organizations, I think there's no dispute, the number one area these breaches are happening is from remote access. And I think that when you start to blend the way that you can continuously look at the status of your assets, the assignment of that ownership, the alignment to the user, and then the reputation of that device based on where it's been, what its status is, and how often it's accessing the network, that naturally builds into and reinforces your ability to look at your security protocols and how you're using your identity access management technologies to actually give access to your environment. And that's why I think you have to have a continuous monitoring concept and strategy in every enterprise. And it has to be inclusive of the data that you're pulling forward from your asset management platform. And it has to have full visibility of that entire life cycle.
And I want to mention that Excel does not count as continuous monitoring. Pulling
Well,
pulling
it,
data
it,
pulling data from an Excel at a specific point in time makes it relevant at that date and time, but is not something that's ongoing. So it's important to have a foundation in place that's pulling data from multiple points, cleaning that data, and then providing a central source of truth.
yeah, and Sarah, look, you bring up a great point. There are organizations today that struggle right now for a lot of reasons and have that dependency on spreadsheets. It can be resources, it can be cost, it can be that the automation is not there. I think the important point is that with technologies like Oomnitza, it doesn't have to be. And frankly, it can be very cost effective.
So we talked about automation and we talked about continuous monitoring. What should I be doing? Let's say my organization is not compliant with NYDFS today. I'm kind of hearing about this for the first time or didn't realize it was a big priority, but looking at the financial impacts, if an organization is not compliant, can be very significant. What steps should organizations take right now to get ready?
Look, I think any organization that is not taking uh, the definition of and the understanding of what it means to have full visibility of their entire inventory is putting themselves at risk. I can tell you that from my past lives of overseeing incident response teams, the first questions you're asking when you get on the ground are, what does the topology of your environment look like? What are the assets that are involved in this? And you have to be able to bring that forward. I think that the first step towards any of this is to really understand what is it that I'm pulling information from. And I think when you do that and you look at technology companies that are going to play here, you really only have a couple of key areas that can help you here. You've got the products that are based off of CMDBs, you've got the products that are based off of chasms, and you've got technologies that really fundamentally were built to do this. I think when you look at products like CMDBs or the CMDB is the back end, there's two challenges. One, uh, I think anybody that's using a CMDB knows that as soon as you invest in that technology, you also have to invest in a partner who's going to help you with the hygiene and the updating of that system. And so there's inherently a significant cost tied to that. I think with chasms, similar to CMDBs, they weren't built for asset management. They were built for vulnerability scanning. So where your CMDBs were really built for ticket management, your chasms were built for vulnerability scanning. technologies like Oomnitza that really focus on an object-based type data model, we were built to capture information and align it to an asset. And so our ability to look at this holistically is unmatched. And that's what drives the high level of accuracy we have. So when you look out into the market and you see these low numbers that talk about the accuracy of data in some of these other platforms, our Oomnitza customers consistently talk about our ability to achieve 98, 99% accuracy. And the reason why we can do that at such a controlled cost, quite frankly, a low cost, is because of the way that we built our back end and our model. And so, I think the number one thing you need to do is really think about, do you want to have an environment where you're aggregating data, you're normalizing that, removing duplication, and building the high fidelity aspect of this across your inventory in a way where you can achieve 98, 99% accuracy. I think once you come to the term that you need to do that, then the next step is go find the solutions that actually have the integrations and the ability to consume and aggregate that data from all of the systems that are supporting your different lines of business. And then once you have that, the next step is figure out how do you actually present what that information looks like so that you can start to apply it to what the compliance regulations want to see, and that you actually can produce a document that demonstrates your entire inventory across your hardware and software assets and does it in a way that you're meeting the compliance of the NYDFS.
So, Rob, I've heard people say things like, well, this regulation doesn't apply to us. We'll just use spreadsheets. We'll deal with it during an audit. We've got much more higher priority things to focus on this year. What would you say to somebody that is in financial services,
Yeah,
does business in New York, and is thinking that this is a low priority?
yeah. Listen, I've through all the times that I've done this, Sarah. It's I heard someone one time give the analogy that everybody on your street thinks that a home security system isn't important until the person next door gets broken into, and then everybody's racing to have it. I think with regulation, many times, unfortunately, organizations don't really understand it until enforcement. And I believe that when you look at the entities and the approximate fines that have gone on in multiple areas, including what the state of New York has done, which is responsible. The state is trying to protect its constituents and the businesses that operate there. And I think that unfortunately, there will be a level of organizations that frankly don't have the board level support or the executive support to give their CIOs and CISOs the resources to really go accommodate this. And they'll be crippled by that and have to think about spreadsheets. And it won't become relevant in those organizations until they are audited and they're fined and they realize, how catastrophic this could be. What I hope is these organizations don't also have to fall victim to a breach that is the result of not monitoring this, because I have seen that world and I have seen the organizations that have lost significant proprietary information, significant revenue loss, and significant reputation with their customers. And I think as organizations start to learn about this and understand it, I think first and foremost, they're going to learn the value of understanding and having the visibility of their entire inventory. And I think at that point, they'll appreciate what the NYDFS has done in making this a hardline component of this overall compliance factor.
And I want to speak to, you and I have both mentioned a couple times the actual financial penalties. I just want to call out what we're talking about here. So
Yeah,
I'm actually looking at the published document, the actual regulation, and the fines are up to $2,500 per day. If NYDFS determines a pattern of noncompliance, fines can increase to up to $15,000 a day. So we're talking about a significant amount of money here. If non-compliance goes on for, let's say, 6 months at $15,000 a day, you're looking at, $2.7 million in fines plus. So we're not talking about a couple dollars here, a couple dollars there. This is a pretty significant financial risk. I
Yeah,
think.
and I think more importantly, look, fines are one aspect of it, right? Fines are a motivator. I think that what the NYDFS has done by enforcing this inventory aspect, and by the way, from what I've read, other compliances are following suit. HIP is going to come out with some language around inventory compliance. I know already the government has indicated that this is important stuff. I've seen a lot of the language from NIST say that it's important to have an understanding of your environment and your inventory. So it's being seen as a common practice and a standard. Look, I will continue to say the fines are one aspect. The reality is if this is not included in your overall hygiene, and if you're not thinking about this from a security strategy, the number one problem that you're going to have is when you get breached, you're not going to have a quick and rapid response. And that is not the right time to be thinking about how do I go look at my entire inventory and understand where all these assets are. And I think any responsible chief information security officer would agree with that.
And I want to close out with a thought here around I look at compliance as a way to drive long-term value for an organization. So I think that's a really important thing is not treating this just like a checkbox, but actually using it as an opportunity to improve IT operations within your organization. And I think we can see NYDFS and many of the other compliances that you mentioned can actually be a forcing function for modern IT governance. So I think the way that organizations look at this, we want to pivot from being kind of a negative, reactive to adding long-term value.
I couldn't agree with you more. I think the way I've always heard this said best is um, compliance is not security, it's not efficiency, and it's not profitability. It's the checkbox that says you're doing those things. And I think the way this document is outlined, I think the content in it touches on multiple areas. It doesn't just touch on inventory, but for us, that's an area where we think we can add tremendous value. I do think it's a responsible document, and I think that organizations will take it seriously. And knowing the state of New York and having done business with a lot of the talented people there in their cybersecurity community, I think it will be enforced, and I think ultimately it will improve all of the organizations that do business inside of the state of New York, or that do business with any organization that's communicating across the state of New York network. So I look forward to seeing the outcome. I think Oomnitza has a quality product that can help these organizations achieve this in a rapid way and in a cost-effective way. And I do think we can help organizations deliver on their mission while still having a good ability to look at their entire inventory and understand their digital landscape.
Other than a quick chat GPT or Google search, where should folks go if they want to learn more about the specifics around this regulation?
Well, hopefully to oomnitza.com. No, I think if you were to quickly do a search on NYDFS and specifically to this conversation, I typically just type in NYDFS November 1, and it pretty much gives you a pretty good understanding of what the requirements are. But I think the state of New York has done a wonderful job of really putting together some meaningful information inside of their website.
And we have a long form blog that was written that outlines very specifically what is involved and what are the regulations and requirements with some other important documents. So we'll make sure that we link that in the show notes as well as an easy reference point.
Awesome.
All right. Well, thanks, Rob.
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate it. This is great.